Shall we dive in?
Yeah.
Yes.
One last time in 2022.
La 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 la.
This is Let Me Sum Up, your irregular deep dive into films about climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Wurundjeri land, and for this bumper holiday special I'm joined, as always, by my two co-hosts. Global Vice President for Mistletoe and Eggnog at the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie Muscovich. Hello, Frankie.
Good evening, Luke. You mixed it up there a bit, because I was going to say I'm just exhausted from all the extortion over the course of this year. But I'm very happy to report that I'm also suffering the after effects of eggnog consumed under the mistletoe.
Well, Frankie, I know that you're a woman of multitudes, and I feel like we've put you in a little bit of a box with your extortion activities, and I think we need to break you out occasionally, right?
I mean, if you want, I'm pretty happy with my little extortion box. That's okay. Let's go with it.
All right, we'll let you out of the box for this one episode, and then back in the box, Muscovich.
Okay.
That's the true spirit of Christmas.
And a man whose holidays are haunted by the ghost of submission's future, Tennant Reid. G'day, Tennant.
Well, you know, it's like when somebody gives you a gift voucher for Christmas and you know that sometime later you're going to go and cash that in and do something new and exciting with it. And that's what the submissions that await us in January. Most of them, in fact, due on February the 7th.
Yeah.
A day that will live in infamy. That's what's awaiting us all.
What is it about February the 7th? I have this strong sense of being in university and all of my essays being due on the same day. And it's like, can't these people get together and compare notes?
It's the first day after a bunch of people in Canberra get back from Bateman's Bay that they feel is a decent interval after Christmas that they can decently ask people to put something in on, except they've all done it at once, so it is collectively indecent. This is a collective action problem, a common pool resource problem. This is the tragedy of the commons at work. Thanks, Canberra.
Thank you, Canberra. I know you're all working very hard, so I won't go too hard on the whole submission traffic jam thing, but yes.
It's okay. Reed did it for us. It's fine.
I regret nothing.
So, as promised on this week's show, we are skipping the report and discussing disaster flick come climate allegory Don't Look Up. But first, we have summed up a bunch of reports since we launched this podcast back in May. There has been the odd report that we haven't been super impressed by, but also a number of genuinely excellent ones that we really enjoyed. But Tennant, Frankie, which report was best? Which is the must-read for Summerupperers with some time on their hands over the festive season? How could we possibly resolve this question?
Well, I reckon we each pick one that we love and fight it out for the title.
Are you proposing an annual award? Perhaps the first annual Let Me Sum Up award for Best Climate and Energy Report?
I could be. But we didn't come up with the snappy title for that yet.
What? Yes, we did. The Papies.
The
You can't do better than the
Papies.
Papies. Presented by the Academy of Research Paper Arts and Sciences.
Or I'm undercutting oligarch Tennant Reid and suggesting that we ask listeners to suggest a name for it.
It's got to be better than the Papies, and that's a high bar.
But is it the Papies if there's just one Papy that gets handed out? It's like
The Papy.
the Papy.
Well, no, it's the Papy this year, and then in future years and henceforth it can be the Papies.
Yes.
Okay, but don't you have to be handing out more than one award?
Well, look, we can come up with more awards, but there's only so much time we can devote to this segment. So maybe, with an opportunity, a pause for Luke to subsequently insert a fanfare, I suggest the one from Rocky, we should get into it. Frankie, what's your nomination?
Well, I'm not saying it's up for a pay piece. I think that sounds silly. We need to come up with a better name. All right. I thought the report from Infrastructure Victoria feeding into the gas substitution roadmap. I even forget the proper title of the report. I think it was Gas Infrastructure in a Net Zero Economy or something like that. It was really comprehensive, and it took a really serious look at a whole range of issues that need to be worked through in a state that's more reliant on fossil gas for heating and industry than any other of the major states. So I think just sort of on reflection, it was a really, that plus the gas substitution roadmap itself, they were really brave pieces of work to do at Commission at the time that they did. When you think about how far the conversation around the future of gas has sort of moved over the past 18 months, we were nowhere near having, very open conversations about electrification and moving away from fossil gas so quickly 18 months ago when this report was commissioned. I think the government had the really good sense to sort of see that debate coming, and I think commissioned some really serious pieces of work that looked at the future of that infrastructure and what possible uses it could be put to, whether that envisages a role for maintaining elements of the network for other forms of gas, be it green hydrogen or biogas, or what the potential future looks like in terms of decommissioning some of that network. And I thought it took a really good sort of sensible view of policy recommendations that I think fed into the roadmap itself. So I just thought it was a cracking report, a really good read. I remember the three of us had a really good chat about it.
This was definitely in my top three. And the title of this episode was a very December 2021 gas report.
That's right.
Which sort of speaks to it being of its moment. And it's kind of, I think we'll look back on it as being kind of in this liminal space between how this debate was kind of pre-2022 and what it's going to look like post-2022 in a post-Ukraine world. The abiding memory I have of that conversation is that they were sort of setting 2030 as this kind of junction point for decisions about the future of gas infrastructure in Victoria. And obviously, both the mega trend of, eye-watering global gas prices, but also, since then, we've also seen the Victorian government commit to a 75 to 80% emissions reduction target by 2035.
Big target.
They've massively changed the parameters for that decision. And necessarily, I think we're going to see a debate over the next several years, not the next 8 years, as to what the future of that infrastructure is. But also just so clear-eyed about what some of the options are in terms of how, different parts of the state and different needs of different types of energy users might be serviced in the future. I thought it was a good one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It was a strong report. And, Frankie, as you said, in commissioning it, a far-sighted step, even though when it came time in mid-2022 to make some decisions and do the initial substitution roadmap, the Victorian government we're talking about here, clearly was a bit cautious, but they had boxed themselves in. They had deliberately boxed themselves in by starting this process, commissioning the Infrastructure Victoria report and the subsequent work, knowing, I think, that it was going to be a bit difficult and a bit sensitive for them along the way. I think it's a rare instance of a report commissioned by a government that is genuinely trying to inform decisions, not to just defer them or to validate decisions they already know they want to take.
Yeah.
So, good one.
Tennant, what report are you going to nominate for the 2022 award?
My nomination for the inaugural 2022 pay piece is...
Papy.
I'm making that happen. I'm making it happen. is the safeguard mechanism design paper. So now this might be a surprising suggestion because this is not a research report. This is not a report or a paper that pioneers any new intellectual directions broadly. But my pitch for this one is that it is likely to have more direct impact on more emissions than any of the other papers that we assessed this year. It's going to...
I'm not sure if I agree with that.
Controversy. It's going to directly guide the reduction of tens of megatons of emissions in Australia over the next decade and more. It has set up an expectation for a level of emissions reduction ambition that, while not as going as far as some would want, goes quite a way and has apparently, based on the government expectation embodied in the 2022 emissions projections that we talked about last episode, that level of ambition seems to have stuck. And I'll say this for it as a report: it lays out design decisions and choices that are available with clarity and, thank God, a reasonable degree of brevity. Anybody who had to make their way through the old green papers and white paper for the carbon pollution reduction scheme will appreciate the value of brevity. So I think it's an important paper. It hasn't advanced understanding that much, but it is, well, we will see in January, I suppose, when the next phase of this work comes out. But it does seem to be advancing policy in a positive direction. That's my pitch.
That's a strong pitch. I am similarly optimistic that that this report's going to, drive a significant step forward in terms of climate policy in Australia, and it certainly seems to be a milestone on that step. You remind me of the Game of Thrones fans who named their daughters Daenerys.
Oh, no.
I know.
Like, you kind of want to see the end of the story.
Is the safeguard mechanism going to turn out to be an omnicidal maniac?
Well, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen.
There's some people in the parliament who think you're right, Luke.
But you don't know how the story finishes.
There's a lot of Dannies going around these days.
I think that's very unlikely. I think that there's every chance that it, as you say, is a positive contribution to an ongoing process that lands in a good place. It also reminds me of the delightful episode we recorded with Catherine Murphy. Yes. And one of the really interesting things about unpacking that consultation paper was, it's kind of freighted with history, right? And it's like a little diorama which encapsulates so many parts of the climate debate over the last 10 or 15 years, both in what's in there and what's absent. So it's kind of fun from that perspective as well.
I was also reflecting fondly on our chat with Murphy. I think the last fire in the forest, featured in the title of that episode.
Episode 7.
That's it. And I think the other thing that's kind of really hard to not think about when we're talking about the safeguard mechanism in that paper is what's going to be happening with the with ACCUs and the Chubb review that's going on at the moment. Of course, I think we want to see the balance of effort by safeguard entities focused on investment in reducing emissions, but for a time and for a proportion of activity, like there will be a need to rely on robust and credible carbon credits. And the future of that scheme that exists already in Australia is there's a bit of a question mark over the integrity of some of those credits. So it will be really interesting to see how that plays out, because one will have quite a significant impact on the other.
And I think we're going to get them both in the week of the 9th of January.
Oh, goody.
So good luck to those of us who thought that we were going to be on holidays that week.
Oh.
No, we're not.
You can hear the ghost of submissions future wooing in the background.
What do you reckon, Luke? Can you top it?
Yeah, what's your papy nominee?
No, it's not a thing.
I think Tennant's making it a thing.
No. Stop buying into it, Luke. You're giving in.
Yeah. It's growing on me. All right, so over the course of this sort of founding year of this podcast, the 15 or so episodes we've done leading up to this one, there's been a big conversation about the shortcomings of integrated assessment models. And for me, the paper that kind of sort of really moved that beyond a critique to sort of starting to think about what could be next in that journey was the paper we covered on episode 11, Empirically Grounded Technology Forecasts and the Energy Transition.
The learning rates paper.
That's what I was going to say. Like, that's what we call it. For me, this paper, it deserves the gong because it did a couple of things really well. It provided an alternative tool for considering the costs of the energy transition, but it also drove home why IMs are such a problem for guiding policy and investment in the transition. It set out this approach called probabilistic cost forecasting, which predicts how technology costs fall as deployment increases. The authors validated this approach by testing it against historic empirical data for around 50 technologies, and having validated it, used it to project forward for a bunch of key technologies, both single technologies and also sort of created some fairly broad brush scenarios, including a scenario which sees the global energy system rapidly transition to zero carbon in a way that's broadly consistent with a 1.5 degree scenario. Now, not taking anything else into account, impacts on lives and livelihood of catastrophic climate change, just looking at the economics, that paper found that, the fast transition scenario, the most ambitious scenario they looked at, saves us between 5 and 15 trillion, just compared against BAU. And a lot of that saving is down to just how low costs can get through rapid deployment. And this is something that IEMs, for the most part, have missed. And in missing it, have overhyped the costs of transition and likely stymied the very deployment that would drive costs down and left us in a worse place than we might otherwise be if other approaches had been taken. So I think it's important to acknowledge this as early work. The team is currently looking at much more granular scenarios. I think the sophistication of this work will continue to evolve, but while there's a lot to do, I think it's really exciting in terms of the contribution to the global debate around transition costs. And it's interesting, like the reason I quibbled with you about, how much direct emissions reduction one of these papers could drive, I guess it depends on your definition of direct, because yes, there's a very point A to point B relationship between the safeguard paper and the emissions reductions that will be driven within safeguard entities. But if this work and work that builds on it is able to really shift the conversation and the considerations that public policy makers bring to bear on decisions that they're making at the global level, that could be truly transformative. And that's why it's so exciting and why I think it deserves our inaugural award.
It's a strong case. What do you reckon, Frankie?
You sort of set it out again really well there, Luke. One of the, there were so many things that were really compelling and really kind of clearly and succinctly kind of laid out in this paper. I thought when you said IAMs have missed this in terms of the rate of improvement and drop in cost in technology, I think that's a bit of a kind assessment, really. I think they've sort of seen what's happened and repeatedly choose to use over conservative assumptions around cost floors and deployment figures in a way that's clearly not justified when you look at the actual trajectories that some of these technologies are on. And as you say, I think the other really kind of big compelling finding out of it is that the fast scenario there is no, there's not a cost to society. It's all benefit, and that's not even factoring in all the other things like societal cost of carbon, which are, sometimes flawed measures. It's just the rate of technology improvement and the cost of that coming down. So very compelling and just really exciting to think about the uses that this work could be put to in the next little while. So, yeah, I think you've got my vote.
And look, I made my case for the safeguard paper, but the learning rates paper is certainly the one that has had the most profound impact on my thinking of the ones that we've covered this year. And it's been a touchstone. I keep thinking about it in relation to stuff that comes up in my day job, in thinking about the role of international emissions trading and Article 6 and things in the COP context. Different aspects of the implications of this paper have played out for me. So, yeah, I think it's a hell of a paper. I look forward to critiques of it and refinement of it by the authors and different efforts at the same challenges. But I am happy to vote for the 2022 Papies Awards for the Oxford Learning Rates paper.
It's not called the Papies, but it can have the award. I'm not giving in yet.
The weight of history, Frankie, the weight of history is going to prevail in the end.
I'm fighting it. I'm still fighting it.
All right, so it is my great pleasure to announce that the first annual PAPI, the Let Me Sum Up Award for Best Climate and Energy Report, goes to empirically grounded technology forecasts and the energy transition. Congratulations to Rupert Way, Matthew C. Ives, Penny Mealy and Jay Doyne Farmer for the win. I can confirm a trophy is not in the mail.
What about a picture of a trophy with a digitally altered, correct engraving added onto it in a very subtle fashion?
I think that that is within our budget, yes. Potentially conveyed via social media.
Look out for the tweet tomorrow, guys.
All right, I think that's a good outcome. And I think we'll call the other two papers runners-up in the inaugural Papies. And yes, congratulations to all involved. They were all generally fantastic papers, and I think we should take this moment to pay tribute to all the people out there slaving away on various research reports, consultation papers. It is often thankless work, and I think that one of the premises of this podcast is it's really important work, and the more that we can sort of engage critically with that work, we bring it to light and use it as a launching pad for thinking through how we work our way through the transition, the better, hey?
We salute them, the authors, co-authors, the spreadsheet constructors, and nerdy analysts and wonks who have done so much to advance the cause of better understanding of and debate of and decision-making on energy and climate this year.
Hear, hear.
All right, shall we talk about a movie?
Sure.
We're filled with enthusiasm about this one, aren't we?
Really?
Sorry. Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. Late 2021 saw the release of Don't Look Up, a satire that sets out to skewer the role of politicians, the media, corporations and the general public in preventing ambitious action on climate change. Directed by Adam McKay and starring everyone from Leonardo DiCaprio to Jennifer Lawrence to Meryl Streep, it is an allegory that explores its themes by imagining a planet-destroying comet is hurtling towards Earth and nobody can get their act together to do anything about it. Now, at this point, it is incumbent upon me to warn you that there are spoilers ahead. So if you don't want to be spoiled on this year-old movie, I suggest you pause this podcast, go find it on Netflix and come back later. But with that important caveat out of the way, Tennant, What did you make of this movie?
So, this is a few things as a movie. It's a comedy. It's a take that to several, like, specific great big thing, risks hitting the earth and our plucky heroes must do something about it movies like Armageddon and A Deep Impact. And it's also a climate allegory. Climate change is never explicitly mentioned in the course of the movie, but it's also like so clearly an allegory for climate change that even if the creators hadn't been talking in social media and interviews and every other possible context about how, hey, it's really about climate change, that is just an inescapable... well, certainly for people like us and you, dear listener, if you are listening to this podcast, you are probably sufficiently suffused with climate stuff that you can't escape thinking, well, this is really about climate change. But a question that is that occurs is, how good is it at being each of those things? Now, this was a movie that inspired a lot of discourse a year ago. And look, frankly, I said, I think there's been enough discourse about this movie. We should talk about a different movie.
And yet we put it on the list.
We will, out of respect for the people, we put it on the list. And the people said, there has not been enough discourse about this movie. We need to know what Frankie and Luke and, heaven help us, yes, even Tennant think about Don't Look Up. And, look, I want to like this movie, but I think that as a comedy, it had the problem of just not being very funny. Comedy's a very individual thing, and what works for one person won't work for another. But, you know, I find myself being like Milhouse at Camp Krusty, saying he's still funny, just not ha-ha funny. There were a couple of things that I thought I even on the second go, I got a good chuckle out of. I thought that Jennifer Lawrence's character's reaction to seeing Leonardo DiCaprio and Cate Blanchett just start making out in the Situation Room at the White House, that was a great reation.
I like how that's the first bit of, like, actual content you've touched on. The most important thing that happened.
I thought that the third go-round of the black bag on the head of a major character joke was very good. I thought some other stuff, like Jennifer Lawrence's inability to let go of the question of why the general charged her for free snacks in the White House. That was like, it was meant to be a building funny joke, and it didn't. So as comedy, not so much. Some other aspects of it I thought did work quite well, but for a comedy, you got to be funny, and to me, not so funny.
I think you've covered off on the whether it's a funny comedy element of it. It is not offensive. It is actually, you know, it's okay as a comedy. I'll sort of put that to one side because while it is supposed to be a comedy, and that's certainly the background of this director, the main job that this movie seems to have given itself is to spark interest, reflection on the climate crisis, and to a degree, because of all the conversation that it generated, job done. Like, there was a lot of conversation around those issues, and so you know, by the metrics that it set for itself, it at least went some way towards achieving those metrics. But I want to sort of reflect on, because I think we need to tackle this head on, how good is a planet-destroying meteor that we find out about 6 months before it's hit as an allegory for the climate crisis? Because I don't think it's very good.
like it's not, right? But I ended up listening to a podcast that Adam McKay, the director, did. Actually, it was on Volt, the podcast that I think we all listen to, another climate podcast.
David Roberts, Dr. Volts on Twitter. Well worth a follow if by some chance you're not already. Absolutely.
And it was like, it's a pretty wide-ranging chat that they had. But McKay sort of acknowledged up front, it's not a perfect allegory at all. But I think in choosing that, the decision was made, or I guess sort of wanting to explore the question, how immediate does the threat have to be to engage people meaningfully in caring about what's going on? It's a very, I think, intentional contrast in that way.
That's what kept taking me out of the film. Because I think in that situation, it doesn't matter how batshit the president is, they're probably going to pay attention if there's a meteor that's going to destroy the planet 6 months away. And that kept taking me out of the movie, is that I didn't think that the actions of the character or the reactions of the media, so all of these players, sort of made sense if you're thinking about it. Oh, that's like how the media or politicians react to the climate crisis, which is this amorphous, slow-moving, distant threat. But they're reacting to a very immediate and acute and understandable threat with a clear and present danger. And when we have those, and I think, the most relatable analogies would probably be the threat of war or a terrorist attack or something that's very immediate, that is easily understood, that everybody can rally around.
Or a pandemic.
Well,
or a pandemic.
Where I think this gets actually uncomfortably resonant.
Yeah. I was going to say that was maybe the other thing I thought about the whole time I was watching this movie, because it's also because it's a satire. So, and I think we've sort of discussed whether it really lands the comedy in places. It's really hard to satirize, and this is very much a United States of America kind of focused movie. It's almost like the rest of the world might not even exist apart from some kind of offhand references.
There's an explosion on a Russia airfield and there's a text message from the Chinese president, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Which is very much of a piece with the kinds of movie that this is parodying. Yep. The America is the centre of everything in these sorts of movies. Is this movie parodying that or just committing the same sin? I don't know, but it's a familiar cinematic issue. And
you should tell that of course they've made that decision on purpose to make it so US centric. But what's really hard to look at this, it's hard to look at it as a satire, because some of the elements of the way this fictional president Jamie Orleans was dealing with the prospective threat of the comet and willing to engage in conspiracy theories and things like that, were not that far off what was happening in the US during the pandemic. It gets really hard to do a satire of something that's just very hard to parody.
It might work better as a pandemic satire than a climate satire.
I think you could almost interchange the two, especially as it related to the way that the president was sort of engaged or not on the issue and her response to it. I thought in that sense, you could imagine watching this movie in the midst of an ongoing pandemic in the US and going, no wonder it's so divisive. I think it would have cut very close to home for a lot of people.
So, the question you asked, Luke, is this a good allegory for climate change? It's a far from perfect allegory for climate change. I'm not sure there is allegories don't tend to be perfect. But I think it functions better as a rethink your great big thing at risk of hitting the earth movie in light of what we have actually seen of how the real world has reacted to, and the real America has reacted to climate change and to the pandemic, and would any of the stuff that we expect in our disastrous impact movies with rapid decision-making by the powers that be and jut-jawed heroes doing the right thing and million-to-one shots panning out with, maybe some losses along the way, but the big mission accomplished. Would any of that actually happen? Or how would real decision-makers and real people, and I think people come off almost as badly as the decision makers in this quite misanthropic movie. And on the pandemic, I will just raise one aspect of that is such a terrible thing. This movie is like the Meryl Streep president is like the female Donald Trump, more or less. I think it's almost unarguable, the single greatest thing, best thing, closest to good thing, I think just genuinely good thing that the Trump administration did was initiate and carry through to completion the Operation Warp Speed vaccine development drive. Like, that has been a very important thing. And Donald Trump is trying to become the Republican nominee for president again, and he can't talk about the single greatest thing that his administration accomplished because his voters hate vaccines. The public discourse in his neck of the woods is so poisoned on this subject that he can't talk about it without losing ground to his opponents. Ron DeSantis has the edge on him because of his flirtation with vaccine skepticism in that regard. So you take that and you look at the reaction of like the people at large in the United States in this movie, where they, some of them don't believe there's a comet, some of them don't believe that it's going to do bad things, some of them are more concerned with fighting culture wars than with anything else. A lot of people are just distracted and don't know what to think. Everybody, even the scientists, are like prioritising reacting to who broke up with who in the celebrity music superstar couple story over the horror that they are trying to convey to people. And like, that looks frighteningly plausible.
I don't know. I feel like a pandemic is amorphous, and it's acute, sure, but it's also amorphous, and open to misinformation in a way that a big rock hurtling towards Earth has more in common with like soldiers on your doorstep, or with, the Twin Towers coming down, or something like that. It's tangible in a way that some of these other things aren't. You can use a bit of magical thinking to wish away the pandemic and pretend it doesn't exist. It's harder, I think. We're arguing about this hypothetical scenario. I just feel like that it would galvanise a different sort of response to something which is necessarily a lot more amorphous in a global pandemic.
I think one of the many things I found really triggering in this movie was like the point that you just made about the comet hurtling through space being a very real thing, except until people could actually see it in the sky at a certain point. Like, conspiracy theories abounded that this wasn't a real thing, that, like the film was portraying that there must have been a decent chunk of people out there that were either too distracted, not well informed enough, didn't believe what the scientists were saying, that maybe it wasn't a thing. And then the moment that little pinprick appeared in the sky with a little tail on it, the culture war solidified into two slogans: just look up and don't look up. And even then, the people in the sort of pseudo Trump right side of politics used it as a wedge against the the science, or, basically...
They want you to look up so they can look down their noses at you.
Exactly. One of the more memorable lines from the movie. And I thought that was one of the, I think, points where the satire really landed for me. I thought that was, triggering, because you could feel something happening in the climate space. I thought that was one of the things that was well done in the film. What I found a little bit frustrating through the film was it was satirizing almost everyone. So in sort of trying to kind of aim its critique at, so it's not just the decision makers like the politicians, but the general public, the scientific community, in a way, definitely the media, as well as kind of big industry, which is represented by this weird love child of Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and I don't know.
Mark Rylance playing a very similar character to the Asperger's billionaire he played in Ready Player One.
Yeah.
In this one, you're meant to think he's malevolent, whereas in Ready Player One, he was only malevolent if you really thought about it.
So it's really aiming its critique at almost everyone in a way. And I think
everyone is awful.
Well, yeah, but I think it just sort of, I think it in a way can weaken the message it's trying to put. It's trying to be so broad in applying its critiques that I feel like it really doesn't land them in certain places.
The animals didn't seem to be responsible for anything. They just kept popping up every half hour or so.
What did they do? Nothing. Bunch of useless animals.
Well, yes, I guess that's true.
And newborn babies.
Yeah.
Babies are stupid, as The Onion informed us so many years ago.
It's every now and again they'd go, it's almost to kind of stop the audience falling into, all these humans are terrible, they deserve to die. And no, wait, there's animals and little seals and babies that are going to die as well. Yes. You should keep carrying that thing.
It was very ham-fisted. But again, that all just felt really intentional. Even the kind of really fast-paced jazzy music that would sort of pipe up between scenes and things like that, and then often be accompanied with montages as well.
So for all that, despite it is an anti-everybody movie. And I thought, towards the end, especially on the second viewing, I thought, it's really pretty disenchanted as well with the people who are trying to do something, because towards the end, when the official US plan is this mad, let's wait till the comet is nearly hitting us and then blow it up just enough that it still hits, but in digestible, mineable chunks to make people a lot of money. And they're protesting that plan. They've got their "Don't just look up" slogan, but they're not really visibly. They don't have themselves a plan to do anything in particular. The vapid music stars are now singing affecting songs about how we stuffed it all up and we need to just look up and do it right now. None of them is achieving anything. But for all that, at the very end, when Jennifer Lawrence and Leonardo DiCaprio and their family and friends and Timothy Chalamet.
He just got picked up along the way for the ride.
Yes.
And fair enough, really.
They're sitting around the table having their last meal, which they are all aware is their last meal because it's over, the comet is about to hit, and they're saying what they're grateful for. And Leo says, we really did have everything, didn't we, when you think about it? It's quite affecting, I found. It wasn't that funny as a comedy, but it was, at the end, quite affecting. And I didn't want the world to get blown up, despite how unpleasant almost everybody in it was.
Proving yourself to be slightly less misanthropic than this movie was.
Yeah.
I did find that that final scene quite moving, having spent some time with these characters, and it was kind of tragic. And despite the fact that I was kind of in the movie and out of the movie, overall, I was very conscious that, this is kind of like a speeded up, intensified, distilled sort of parable for what we could be working towards in terms of the way we're dealing with climate. With what I do in my day job and the things that I think about regularly, it was kind of uncomfortable just spending that time in that space, being confronted with that for a couple of hours.
We spent a lot of time thinking about solutions and watching people just comprehensively stuff it up for 90 minutes, watching the scientists be unable to explain themselves in a way that cuts through.
Oh, did you guys find it really triggering when there's so many bits like this through the movie? I think it was at the start of the first presidential briefing.
Yes. That
Leo DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence were giving Meryl Streep and her son, who Jonah Hill, who is awful. Like in
he's really terrific at being awful in this movie. Coked
a little too terrific.
Oedipally fixated son and chief of staff. Oh, he's so good.
It was great, and I think like very kind of thinly veiled parody of maybe Eric Trump or Donald Trump Jr. because he's also the president's son and chief of staff at the same time. Nepotism. But you start seeing Leo DiCaprio set up the science of what he's about to report, and he starts wading into scientific jargon about the calculation methodology that is being used, and like you just see Jonah Hill's eyes roll into the back of his head and just go, I gotta stop you there, I have no idea what you're talking about. That hit a little close to home. I think you're right, it also is aiming criticism in a way at the people who are working in this space, and perhaps one of the more useful things to take out of this if you're working in this space is to be constantly thinking about how we can be explaining the work that we do in our day job in a way that's really accessible to people who don't live and breathe this stuff 24/7.
I think the movie's also making the case that the best way to have your message accepted is to be a bearded white man.
Yeah, well, it didn't take long for the nose-pierced female grad student to get run roughshod over to it.
I think Jennifer Lawrence does great work in this movie. I think she was terrific. I thought Leonardo DiCaprio was doing fine work as this nerdy, nervous, self-effacing Midwestern academic who starts transforming beneath the positive reaction that he starts getting from people to the way he says things. I just wish the script had been a little funnier.
I did wonder a little bit about his character arc, because he starts out very earnest and very concerned, and he sort of gets taken in by this this harebrained idea that they're just going to blow up the comet a little bit and then mine the resulting asteroids, and then he kind of becomes the face of the whole enterprise. Yeah. Like he's on advertisements saying, "Oh, you shouldn't be worried about this. It's all going to be great. You just ring this hotline."
Call our helpline. Yeah.
But then suddenly
he's corrupted by power.
He is.
He's tempted and taken in for a while, and then he can't abide it any longer.
He has this breakdown on TV. Decides, this is all a load of hogwash. And then he's just back in the other movement again. And it's like everyone's like, oh, that's totally cool. You're back. You agree with us again. Like, now you're the figurehead of the movement once more. I was like, is that how that would play out? I'm not sure. They sort of allied that whole turning back to the heart of the anti-comet movement. But anyway.
The bit where after his rant on morning news television, where he's still let onto Sesame Street to talk to the children, and the children say, is the plan going to work? And he's like, no, everyone's going to die.
That was one of the funnier pieces.
The kids are like, I don't like this man.
I don't like you anymore.
Character arc be damned. It was worth it for that 10-second scene.
One of the other moments that I thought was actually funny, but in a really sad way, was when I think it's sort of after the initial mission. So we should kind of say that whilst the president, in the first instance, when hearing about the comet that's hurtling towards Earth, decides that can't possibly be true, or, doesn't care about it because she's got other very important
midterms are coming up.
Midterms to worry about, decides this isn't a priority, we'll just sit tight and wait and see. And then upon revisiting the politics of a unifying cause, like tackling a comet, re-engages with it, first off launches a strategy which sees some ex-military beefcake guy shot into space on a retired shuttle, which then diverts after launch spectacularly back to Earth, because they've decided at that point mid-flight that they shouldn't actually blow up the comet. They should wait until it gets closer so they can mine it for trillions of dollars worth of resources. Anyway, after that first mission, I think Jennifer Lawrence goes back home to her parents. I think she's been kicked out of wherever. Everything's uncertain because this mission was aborted, but the president's now spruiking this new plan that there's gonna be all this economic opportunity from exploiting the resource-rich comet that will fall to Earth in tiny, manageable chunks, and she's feeling very dejected and has nowhere to go. So she goes home and she's on her parents' doorstep. Her parents open the door, but there's a screen door there. She's locked. She goes to open it. She's like, open the door. And they're like, no politics, but we're for the jobs the comet will provide. And she just stands there, kind of stupefied by it. I thought that was great. I mean, horrifying, but great. That was one of the few moments that I thought were genuinely funny in a really horrifying way.
I thought that was a good moment, but I didn't laugh. And I'm a person who enjoys a black comedy. Like the movie this is most compared to, I think, is Dr. Strangelove. And Dr. Strangelove is very funny. It's very quotable. And if I was going to point to one key difference, it is that Dr. Strangelove it's played pretty straight. The absurdity of what is being said and done is largely not recognised by the characters, but also the characters. Like they have the role of straight people in a comedy routine. Dr. Strangelove doesn't try and make you feel sad or feel for the stakes as more spoilers. The world is annihilated in a completely avoidable nuclear holocaust, and to your point, Luke, it is much more tightly focused on one specific absurdity, which is the notion of security through being on a constant knife-edge balance of nuclear annihilation. and you know, it's directed by Stanley Kubrick, which helps, and written by Terry Southern, which helps. So that's a great movie, and this is all right.
So the let me sum up review of Don't Look Up. Go watch Doctor Strangelove.
Yes.
As always, we close out the show with one more thing, in which we all share a piece of culture that we think could captivate your attention this holiday season. Frankie, what have you got?
I've got a lovely speech that I'd encourage everyone to go have a watch of. So Noel Pearson, amazing author, thought leader, Indigenous man, has given this year's ABC's Boyer Lectures, and there's a really great speech that he gave that you can go watch, and I think it sets out a really powerful argument for why a voice to Parliament is really just around delivering equity and justice and sort of moving us along the path of reconciliation. So I know that's it's obviously it's going to be a big political conversation in the next 12 months. We've got a government who's committed to run a referendum before the end of the next calendar year, so there's going to be a lot more conversation about this in the months to come. And anyway, it's just a really moving speech. I encourage everyone to go have a look at that. I've watched it a few times.
Fantastic.
That sounds really good. I've heard such great things about it, and your recommendation is a reminder to queue it up and listen to it over the next few days. So thank you for that.
Do it now.
That's it. Link in the show notes. Tennant, what have you got?
So I've been on a bit of a cyberpunk kick recently after playing the several years worth of patches later version of the video game Cyberpunk 2077, and that sent me to the ur-text of the cyberpunk genre, rereading Neuromancer by William Gibson, published 1983. This is where The Matrix comes from. This is where a lot of ideas and tropes associated with the high-tech and low-life genre of cyberpunk were crystallised, and I can report that nearly 40 years later, it's still a cracker of a book. It's very compelling and exciting and well written, despite William Gibson not being a technologically knowledgeable person at that time, as famously evidenced by his far future high-tech criminal operator character having a whole 30 megabytes of stolen random access memory to move to his buyers at one point in the novel. But this read-through, it had some added resonance for me because of my reading some months back of the Build Great Big Giant Space Habitats book, that the High Frontier that was big in the 70s. And Neuromancer has this weird combination of techno-optimism and techno-pessimism. Gibson is taking a significant chunk of the action takes place in one of these enormous space colonies that Gerard O'Neill was writing about in the 70s. It's turned out to be economical and indeed highly profitable to build massive habitats with lunar concrete, but they are a place where crime and corruption and the turning inward of human potential into atrociousness happens, rather than the optimistic flowering in O'Neill's work. So Neuromancer, worth a go. And I now hear that Apple TV Plus is going to have a series of it filming next year. So more people can be introduced to a blank slate protagonist case and compelling inset mirror shades surgically implanted over her eye sockets Razor Girl Street Samurai Molly Millions, who was a much more compelling figure.
There must be some massive sci-fi nerd over at Apple TV between this and Foundation. And
I hope they do a better job than Foundation. Foundation kept threatening to become interesting and never quite managed it.
It wasn't that great. But there's clearly someone who's like, this is unfilmable. Finally, I have my chance in this age of streaming. Of billions and billions of dollars shoveled in my general direction. Some of them will come off. That sounds very promising. And I should say, I caught up with one of your previous One More Things, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I second your endorsement. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
I won't say anything else, but you should all watch it. So we've had an audio recommendation. We've had a book recommendation. I'm going to round out these summer holiday recommendations with a movie. I'm going to recommend Glass Onion, Rian Johnson's sequel to 2019's Knives Out, a movie I absolutely loved. I can't get enough of Daniel Craig's Southern PI, Benoit Blanc. The entire rest of the cast is different. It's very Agatha Christie, which was kind of implicit in the premise of Knives Out, but they now take, your beloved detective is on a new case. I think it kind of works to not know anything about the movie going in. So I will say nothing other than that. It is a completely different milieu, but is similar in its skewering of people that have a lot of money and a lot of power and are far too pleased with themselves. So it has that in common with its predecessor, but is otherwise completely different. I am a little bit sad as a massive Last Jedi fan that Rian Johnson doesn't seem to be getting to his Star Wars trilogy anytime soon. But in the absence of that, maybe that seems to be off in the long grass somewhere. If he can keep making Benoit Blanc films, that'll keep me happy in the meantime.
Second that. I watched Knives Out like 3 or 4 days ago. It was really good. I'd missed that. And then I'm halfway through Glass Onion. It is no reflection on how good the movie is, but I fell asleep the other night at the halfway mark. I'm tired. And
you have a tiny human.
I have a tiny human.
Entirely fair enough, Frankie.
So we started with great ambition at about 9 p.m. I think come 10 p.m. I was gone. But I'm pleased to report that's what my plans are for after we finish wrapping this pod.
Well, if you're halfway through that movie, I can report the second half is outstanding. It all comes together. I won't say anything more. All right. Well, I think that wraps up. Let me sum up for 2022. Any parting thoughts for our Summerupperers team?
I'm just excited at all the reports we're going to read next year. And I look forward to going through them all with you two and bringing our dear listeners along with us for the next stage of the unstoppable freight train that is the Let Me Sum Up podcast.
Juggernaut.
The juggernaut.
Yeah. And I just want to, echo that, but also thank you too. Like, it's been such a fun little adventure this last year doing this with you and to our listeners. There's a few of you now, so thanks for tuning in every fortnight for the last little while. I think we've had a lot of fun making this podcast and really hope you're enjoying it.
And if you are enjoying it, don't forget to like, subscribe, rate and review. It really helps.
That is the gift you can give us this holiday season. Well, yes, freight train juggernaut. Notwithstanding that, we do need a little break, so we're going to take January off, but we'll be back better than ever, fresh and ready to take on the latest reports in your feeds in February. So we look forward to that. But until then, we're all on Twitter. Frankie is at
Frankie Muscovich.
Tennant is at
Tennant Reid.
And my handle is at Luke Menzel. If you have any thoughts on papers that we should be reviewing in those February episodes, you can send them to mailbag at letmesumup.net. You should, of course, be subscribing to Let Me Sum Up in your favourite podcast app. If this is your first episode, apologies. It is in no way representative of the standard episodes. You may have picked up along the way that we usually talk about reports. That is the vast majority of content that appears in this feed. If you want to appraise yourself of that, you'll find the full back catalogue of episodes at letmesumup.net. But for Frankie Muscovich and Tennant Reid, I'm Luke Menzel for the last time in 2022. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
That's a wrap, yeah.
If it had been Soylent Green, we would still be going on the movie itself. I'd be just getting around to talking about the book.
What do you reckon the nominees for 2023 climate movie will be? A, Soylent Green. B, Soylent Green. C, Soylent Green.
I think there's a lot of wisdom in the campaign slogan of Elaine Marley for governor of Malay Island in The Secret of Monkey Island. When there's only one candidate, there's only one choice.